Chris Dommett, you're a mortgage broker here, which is somewhat unusual in the UAE. How did that come about?
On a personal basis or on the basis of being a mortgage broker?
All bases.
Okay, the mortgage market effectively developed about 4 or 5 years ago as the banks started to lend. And when you only have 1 or 2 lenders in the market, you really don't need a broker because clients will go directly to the banks. But as more banks came into the market with a greater variety of products, potential clients realised that they had more choice. So the opportunity arose for brokers to link the buyers with the lenders. And so 1 or 2 brokers set up, and John Charcol came to Dubai about 2 years ago on the back of being a very successful mortgage broker in the UK, probably the oldest and largest independent broker in the UK. They saw opportunities in the Dubai market, particularly as it matured and grew, to expand what they'd done in the UK into Dubai. Personally, I came from a banking background, and I'd been with one of the local banks running their retail credit department, including the mortgages. And when the company were looking for a CEO to run the company, they approached me because they knew me from before. For me personally, it represented a great opportunity to run my own business effectively in a market that at the time was growing very rapidly.
And that's the that's the interesting point, because you came a year ago into this job, and so you were just in time for the kind of crash.
That's right. It's probably all my fault, but yeah, I joined in June last year, so for the first couple of months we were dealing with a very active market, and then the train really hit the buffers probably October last year. So it's been a really challenging year, but in many ways the market has turned around, and in terms of long-term stability and sustainability, it's probably actually stronger now for us than it was a year ago. And the way it's changed is that where we source our business from is typically the real estate agents and developers and people like lawyers, word of mouth, that sort of thing. A year ago, the real estate agents weren't interested in buyers who wanted to buy with a mortgage. They were just interested in cash buyers that they could take the money, flip the property, pass a few documents. A client who needs a mortgage is going to take longer, it's going to be a bit more complicated, he might not get the mortgage. So the real estate agents really weren't that interested in dealing with us a year ago. Now they can't sell a property without a mortgage. There's still a few cash buyers, but generally people need finance to buy the properties. So we're finding that the real estate agents are very keen to tie up with us, because the only way they get their commission and get the deal through is to make sure that we have a mortgage arranged as well. And it's the same with the developers. Again, if you go back a year, developers were really only interested in selling off-plan. Their cash flow came from continuous off-plan sales. And they didn't really care if the buyer had the money to keep the mortgage payment, the stage payments going. And therefore they weren't that worried about whether they took out a mortgage. What you're finding now though is those buyers who don't have a mortgage are struggling to make the payments, and as a result the developer's cash flow is really being hit. So we're actually finding that the developers are much more keen to work with us for the existing clients, but also for future launches and resales of properties. We're finding they're coming to us and wanting to work with us because we're specialists in getting mortgages for people. We know which banks are lending, we know which sort of clients can and can't get mortgages. And so instead of the developer maybe spending 2 or 3 months trying to find a solution for a buyer who quite frankly will never get a mortgage, in consultation with us they can find out very quickly whether the answer is yes or no. And then we can help them to find a mortgage. Once they've got the mortgage, then the cash flow for that particular unit is secured until completion.
John Charcol started business here 2 years ago, so you had a year and maybe 1 or 2 months when you first started, when things were going well. Do you have any sort of idea how many of the people who had the mortgages, those mortgages within that period, how many of them defaulted when the crash came?
Very difficult to tell, because we tend to, I wouldn't say we lose contact with our clients after the mortgage is approved and drawn down, because they then become the bank's clients. We've certainly had a few clients coming back to us, particularly those dealing with Islamic mortgages, who are now saying, you know, I bought at X price, I'm not paying anything yet until completion, but the property's not worth anything like what I paid for it. I don't want this property, what do I do? And obviously we can give them a bit of advice and liaise with the banks for them, but there's actually very little we can do for them. But really, the feedback we've got is actually very few of our clients have defaulted, because when we actually first start talking to the clients, we do a very detailed fact find, looking at their ability to repay, because there's no point us proposing them as a mortgage applicant if we're not sure that they're going to get approved. So we look very carefully at their income, their expenditure, their ability to repay, and we manage their expectations in terms of what sort of size mortgage they can get. So I think typically if you looked at the profile of clients who come through us and those who've gone direct, you'd probably find significantly lower ratio of defaults of people who come through us, because we do a lot more due diligence maybe than those that do go directly.
What kind of, how would you characterize the clients that you're getting now?
A real mix. Our ideal client is somebody who has been here for a year plus, has a steady job with a recognised name. People talk about the Emirates pilots as being the ideal candidates. Maybe not so much now, but they work for a big company that will pay their salaries every month. They've got bank statements which are in order, no bounce checks. Nice clean sort of history of repayments and low outstandings on existing debts. They're our ideal clients, and we don't get too many of those. What we're finding at the moment, though, is we're getting a great demand from non-residents, people who've bought properties from places like UK, US, India, places like that. I had one from Kazakhstan this morning, who are really struggling to find lenders who deal with non-residents. We're finding quite a lot of self-employed people who, again, the banks are very reluctant to lend to, but one or two of them will, so we can help them to get a mortgage with the banks that are still lending. We're finding quite a few bulk buyers, commercial, people who bought in commercial quantities, and again, the banks are pretty reluctant